Blood-soaked and breathless, Jack Morrison cradled the pregnant woman he'd just dragged from the raging river, her terrified eyes locked on the Apache hunter who now held her life in his hands. At dawn, dust clouds announced the approach of 40 armed riders led by her husband, and Jack knew his act of mercy had just made him a target. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The dust of the Arizona territory hung in the air like a veil, softening the harsh lines of the distant mountains. Jack Morrison sat motionless atop his chestnut stallion, his weathered face turned toward the setting sun. The light caught in the creases around his eyes, carved deep by years of squinting against the merciless desert glare. At 45, Jack had the lean, hardened physique of a man who had spent most of his life outdoors, moving with the rhythms of the wild rather than the tick of a clock. They called him Silent Wolf in the settlements, a name whispered with equal measures of fear and respect. Few knew he was born John Algernon Morrison to a cavalry officer and his Apache wife. Fewer still knew of the years he'd spent as a scout for the UES. Army before the ghosts of too many campaigns drove him to a more solitary existence as a bounty hunter. The Apache blood that flowed through his veins gave him tracking skills that seemed supernatural to most white men. The military training from his father had taught him discipline and strategy. Together, they made him nearly unstoppable. Jack adjusted the worn leather hat that shaded his face and nudged his horse forward. The animal responded to the subtle pressure of his legs, requiring no verbal command. They understood each other, these two lone creatures. 7 years together had forged a bond deeper than words. "One more ridge, thunder," he murmured, his voice rough from disuse. "Then we'll make camp." The stallion's ears flicked back at the sound, the only acknowledgement needed. The sun slipped lower, painting the desert in shades of amber and gold. Jack's keen eyes scanned the horizon, noting the curling wisp of smoke rising from beyond the ridge. Settlers, most likely, or perhaps the James Corbin he'd been tracking for 2 weeks. The bounty on Corbin's head would keep Jack fed through the winter, assuming he could bring the man in alive. As darkness began to settle across the land, Jack made his camp in a sheltered hollow, away from prying eyes. His movements were efficient, practiced. The small fire he built cast dancing shadows on the rock wall behind him. From his saddlebag, he withdrew a worn journal, its leather cover soft with age. Inside, sketches of plants, animals, and landscapes filled the pages, interspersed with neat handwriting, observations, memories, fragments of a life lived mostly in solitude. Jack's fingers traced over a drawing of a woman's face, the lines gentle despite the roughness of his hands. Elena, dead 16 years now, taken by the same fever that claimed their infant son. Her memory had faded like footprints in sand, but the hollow ache of loss remained. "Ooh, you'd hardly recognize me now," he whispered to the sketch, a rare smile softening his features. The fire crackled in response, sending sparks upward like brief, brilliant stars. Sleep came to Jack as it always did, lightly, with one hand near his Colt revolver. The habits of survival were etched too deeply to abandon, even in relative safety. His dreams, when they came, were a tangled web of memories. His mother's soft singing in Apache, his father's stern lessons, the weight of a military rifle in his young hands, Elena's laughter like water over stones. Dawn broke with the harsh cry of a desert hawk. Jack was already awake, watching the sky lighten from indigo to pale blue. The morning ritual was as ingrained as breathing. Check the surroundings, refresh the fire, prepare coffee in the battered tin pot. The strong, bitter brew was one of his few luxuries. As he sipped the steaming coffee, Jack pulled out the wanted poster from his pocket. James Corbin stared back at him from the crude sketch, a sharp-featured man with cold eyes, wanted for robbery and murder in 3 counties. The reward, $500. "Time to earn our keep, Thunder," Jack said, folding the poster and tucking it away. He broke camp with the same efficiency with which he'd set it up, leaving barely a trace of his presence. The Apache part of him respected the land too much to scar it unnecessarily. The bounty hunter in him knew the value of invisibility. The horse's muscles bunched beneath him as they climbed the ridge, following a trail so faint most men would have missed it entirely. Jack felt the familiar tension building in his chest, the hunter's awareness, sharpening his senses until every broken twig and displaced stone told a story. Below them, the salt river glinted like a silver snake, swollen with the recent rains. The settlement of Riverton lay several miles downstream, its scattered buildings barely visible in the distance. But Jack's attention was drawn to something else, fresh tracks leading down toward the river bend, where the current ran swiftest. Thunder snorted, tossing his head. Jack laid a calming hand on the horse's neck. "Easy, boy," he murmured. "What's got you spooked?" The answer came moments later, a distant sound carried on the wind, a cry, high and desperate, fighting against the constant rush of the river, human, female. Jack's body tensed, his mind calculating distances and dangers, even as he urged Thunder down the slope toward the sound. Silent Wolf might live by the bounty, but some instincts ran deeper than profit. And something in that cry spoke to the part of him that had never fully surrendered to solitude. The cry came again, more desperate this time. Jack leaned forward in the saddle, urging Thunder down the steep incline toward the river. Rocks clattered beneath the stallion's hooves as they descended, sending small avalanches of pebbles before them. The roar of the water grew louder, drowning out all other sounds of the desert. When they reached the riverbank, Jack's sharp eyes scanned the churning surface. The salt river was unforgiving at the best of times, but the spring rains had transformed it into a beast, swollen and angry, tearing at its banks with foam-flecked teeth. Debris raced along its surface, branches, uprooted shrubs, the occasional flash of something larger. Then he saw her. 50 yards upstream, a woman clung to a fallen cottonwood that had wedged itself between 2 boulders. Her skirts billowed around her in the current, weighing her down, pulling her under. One pale hand gripped the rough bark with desperate strength, while the other arm wrapped protectively around her swollen belly. Even from this distance, Jack could see she was heavy with child. Without hesitation, Jack slid from Thunder's back. He stripped off his coat and gun belt, dropping them onto the rocky shore. He kept only his knife, strapped securely to his thigh. The stallion nickered nervously, sensing his master's intent. "Stay!" Jack commanded, his voice cutting through the river's roar. He waded into the shallows, gasping as the cold water hit his legs. The current tugged at him immediately, hungry for another victim. Jack braced himself against it, calculating distances and forces with the precision of a man whose survival had always depended on reading nature correctly. The woman's strength was failing. He could see it in the way her head dipped lower, in the trembling of her arm as it clutched the log. Her fair hair, plastered against her face, shone like gold in the afternoon sun. Jack pushed deeper until the water reached his chest. Then, with a deep breath, he launched himself forward, swimming powerfully against the current. The river fought him, trying to sweep him downstream, but he used its force, angling his body to let it carry him toward the trapped woman, while still making headway across its width. Her eyes widened as she saw him approaching. Blue eyes, he noted, filled with equal parts terror and desperate hope. Her lips moved, but the river swallowed her words. "Hold on!" Jack shouted, his voice uncharacteristically loud as he battled to make himself heard over the water's roar. "I'm coming!" He reached the log just as her grip began to fail. His hand shot out, grabbing her wrist seconds before she would have been swept away. The sudden weight nearly pulled him under, but he managed to brace one foot against the submerged part of the log, steadying them both. "Put your arms around my neck," he instructed, his face inches from hers. She hesitated only a moment before complying, her arms trembling with fatigue as they encircled him. Jack could feel the hard roundness of her belly pressed against him, the life within protected by nothing more than flesh and desperate determination. "I have you," he said, his voice gentler now that she could hear him. "Don't let go." With his left arm securing her against him, Jack used his right to help navigate. He kicked away from the log, letting the current take them, but angling toward the shore. The woman's face pressed against his neck, her breathing rapid and shallow. He could feel her heartbeat, frantic as a trapped bird's. The journey to the bank seemed endless. Twice, debris slammed into them, once opening a gash on Jack's shoulder that he barely noticed. The cold numbed his limbs, making each movement a battle of will, but inch by inch, he fought their way across the current until at last his feet found purchase on the rocky riverbed. Staggering, he carried the woman onto the shore, only setting her down when they were well clear of the water. She collapsed immediately, her legs giving way. Jack caught her, easing her onto a flat boulder. In the full light of day, he could see her clearly for the first time. She was young, perhaps 25, with features that might have been delicate in other circumstances. Now, her face was pale with exhaustion, her lips tinged blue from the cold. Her dress, once fine, clung to her like a second skin, revealing a pregnancy well into its final months. But it was her eyes that held Jack's attention. Clear blue, intelligent, and already regaining their strength. "Thank you," she gasped, one hand still clutching his arm while the other cradled her belly. I was certain." "You're safe now," Jack said, cutting off her words with the gentle awkwardness of a man unaccustomed to conversation. He shrugged off her gratitude as he would shake water from his coat. "Are you hurt?" She took inventory of herself with surprising composure. "No, I don't think so, just cold and frightened." Her hand moved in small circles over her belly. "The baby is moving. That's good." Jack nodded, relieved. He turned and whistled for Thunder, who approached cautiously, still unsettled by the smell of fear and river water. "I'm Sarah," she said, watching him. "Sarah Whitman. My husband is Thomas Whitman. We have a ranch about 10 miles east of Riverton." The name meant nothing to Jack, who deliberately kept himself apart from the affairs of settlers. He merely nodded again, retrieving his coat from where he'd left it and draping it around her shoulders. "Jack Morrison," he offered simply. "And you're?" Sarah's eyes took in his features, the copper skin, the high cheekbones that spoke of his heritage. But she didn't complete the thought. "Half Apache," he supplied, his tone neutral. "Some call me Silent Wolf." Something flickered in her eyes, not fear, which he was accustomed to seeing, but curiosity. "How did you find me, Mr. Morrison?" "Heard you," he said, wringing water from his shirt. "Was tracking someone else?" "Bounty hunter," he added by way of explanation. Sarah Whitman looked at the man who had saved her life, really looked at him, and Jack had the unsettling feeling that she was seeing more than most ever bothered to. "Well, Mr. Morrison," she said quietly, "it seems Providence had other plans for your skills today." The late afternoon sun no longer offered much warmth. Jack surveyed their surroundings with a practiced eye, noting the deepening shadows as the day waned. Sarah Whitman's dress was soaked through, and though she tried to hide it, he could see her shivering beneath his coat. "Need shelter," he said, reaching a decision. "Night's coming." "Temperature drops fast in these parts." Sarah glanced at the darkening sky, then down at her sodden clothes. She nodded, practicality overriding any concerns about propriety. "Yes, I think that would be wise." Jack helped her to her feet, steadying her when she swayed slightly. The color was returning to her face, but exhaustion had etched itself into every line of her body. Without asking permission, he lifted her onto Thunder's back, ignoring her small sound of surprise. "There's a hollow about half a mile from here," he explained, taking the horse's reins and leading them away from the river, protected from the wind. Good place to dry out. They moved slowly, Jack matching his pace to Thunder's careful steps over the uneven ground. Sarah sat straight in the saddle, one hand always resting on her belly, as if reassuring the child within. She watched Jack's back as he led them, noting the way he moved, fluid and silent despite his soaked clothing. "You said you were tracking someone," she ventured after a while. "A dangerous man." Jack glanced back at her, his expression revealing nothing. "James Corbin killed 3 men during a bank robbery in Phoenix. Another 2 during his escape." Sarah's hand tightened on her belly. "And now he's in this area." "Tracks were fresh this morning," Jack confirmed. "Heading toward Riverton, looked like—" They lapsed into silence again, but Jack could feel her tension. It radiated from her like heat from sun-baked stone. The hollow, when they reached it, was exactly as Jack had described, a natural depression in the landscape, sheltered on 3 sides by rock formations. The remnants of an old campfire suggested he wasn't the first to find this refuge, but the ashes were old, undisturbed. Jack helped Sarah down from Thunder, then set about making camp with swift efficiency. He gathered dry brush and kindling, started a small fire, and unpacked his meager supplies. From his saddlebag, he produced a spare shirt, worn but clean, and offered it to Sarah without comment. She accepted it with a graceful nod. "Would you?" She gestured vaguely, the faintest color touching her cheeks. Jack turned his back immediately, busying himself with the fire while she changed. The sound of wet fabric being peeled away and wrung out filled the silence between them. "You can turn around now," she said eventually. Jack's shirt hung loose on her frame, despite her pregnancy, reaching nearly to her knees. She had spread her dress on a nearby rock, hoping the night air would help it dry. His coat remained wrapped around her shoulders. With her hair starting to dry in golden waves around her face, she looked younger, more vulnerable. "Thank you," she said, settling herself beside the fire. "For everything," Jack merely nodded, pouring water from his canteen into the small pot he used for coffee. He added the last of his coffee grounds, then set it at the edge of the flames. "You didn't tell me how you ended up in the river," he said after a moment, his curiosity finally overcoming his habitual reserve. Sarah's hands twisted in her lap. "I was riding to Riverton. We needed supplies and—" She paused, a shadow crossing her face. "Thomas has been away, checking on our cattle herds in the north pastures. I thought I could manage the trip myself. It's not far." Jack said nothing, but his raised eyebrows spoke volumes. "Yes, I know," she acknowledged, with a hint of rueful humor. "Not my wisest decision, given my condition. But we have good men working our ranch, and I've never been one to sit idle, waiting for others to do what I can do myself." The coffee began to bubble, and Jack removed it from the fire, pouring a cup for each of them. Sarah accepted hers gratefully, wrapping her fingers around the tin mug for warmth. About 2 miles from the river, 3 men rode out from behind a rock formation. She continued, her voice steadier now. They weren't wearing masks, didn't try to hide their faces. That's when I knew they didn't intend to let me go. Jack's hand tightened around his mug, but his face remained impassive. They demanded money, of course. I only had a few dollars with me. Then they took my horse. Her voice hardened. My father gave me that mare when I married Thomas. She was special to me. The river? Jack prompted softly. Sarah's eyes grew distant. They said they'd escort me to Riverton, make sure I got there safely. Their leader had a look in his eyes. I've seen men look at cattle that way before slaughter. She shuddered. I ran. It was foolish, but I ran. There was a slope. I lost my footing, and then the river. Jack nodded slowly. These men, would you recognize them again? Yes. The word was firm, certain, especially their leader. Tall, with a scar through his right eyebrow, cold eyes. She paused, realization dawning. He matches the description of the man you're hunting, James Corbin. The fire crackled between them, sparks spiraling upward into the darkening sky. Jack's expression didn't change, but something in his posture shifted, becoming more alert, more focused. Rest now, he said, rising to his feet. We'll start for your ranch at first light. Your husband will be looking for you. Sarah watched him move to the edge of their small camp, his silhouette dark against the twilight sky. And Corbin? She asked quietly. Jack didn't turn around. Some trails don't grow cold, he said. Not for me. Dawn broke in streaks of amber and gold across the eastern sky. Jack, who had slept little, was already awake, watching the horizon lighten. Sarah slept nearby, curled on her side, one hand cradling her belly even in sleep. The vulnerability of her position wasn't lost on him. A woman heavy with child, miles from home, in the company of a stranger whose reputation would cause most settlers to reach for their guns. She stirred as the first rays of sunlight touched her face, blinking away dreams before memory returned. Jack offered her water without a word. She accepted it gratefully, managing to sit up despite her awkward shape. How do you feel? He asked, his voice rough with disuse. Sarah took inventory of herself, pressing a hand to her lower back. Sore. But the baby is calm this morning. That's good. She attempted to smooth her tangled hair. My dress. Still damp, Jack replied. But it'll dry faster once we're moving. They broke camp quickly, Sarah helping despite Jack's stoic insistence that she rest. Her dress, though not completely dry, was wearable. She changed behind a rock formation, emerging with a determined expression that reminded Jack of young cavalry officers before their first battle, afraid but refusing to show it. Jack helped her onto Thunder's back, then mounted behind her. The arrangement was oddly intimate, her body nestled against his, her scent, river water and something floral, filling his nostrils. He held the reins carefully, creating what space he could between them, out of respect. Which direction? He asked, breaking the awkward silence. Sarah pointed east. The Flying W Ranch. It's about 5 miles beyond those hills. Thunder set off at a steady pace, hooves crunching on the rocky ground. The morning was quiet, disturbed only by the occasional call of a desert bird or the rustling of small creatures in the brush. Jack remained vigilant, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. The man who had survived as long as he had in this unforgiving land did so by never letting down his guard. Were you born in the territory? Sarah asked suddenly, her voice almost startling in the silence. Jack hesitated, unaccustomed to personal questions. Yes, he finally said. My father was a cavalry officer. My mother was Chiricahua Apache. Sarah nodded, digesting this information. That explains your tracking abilities. And your name? Silent Wolf. It's what some call me, Jack said with a slight shrug that she felt rather than saw. Not my choice. What would you choose if you could name yourself? She asked, glancing back at him. The question caught him off guard. No one had ever asked him that before. Just Jack, he said after a moment. Jack is enough. She nodded, satisfied with his answer in a way he didn't fully understand. They rode in companionable silence for a while, the sun climbing higher, burning away the morning chill. Sarah's body gradually relaxed against his, her initial tension easing. You mentioned a husband, Jack said eventually. Thomas. Yes, her voice warmed. Thomas Whitman. We've been married 3 years now. He came west with nothing but determination and a dream of building something lasting. Pride colored her words. Now the Flying W is one of the largest cattle operations in the territory. Thomas is driven. Jack noted the slight hesitation. And you? What drives Sarah Whitman? She seemed surprised by the question. I suppose the same things that drive most women. A home. Family? Her hand moved to her belly again. This little one will be our first. You're far from most women I've encountered, Jack observed dryly. Most wouldn't attempt a solo journey to town in your condition. Sarah laughed, the sound unexpectedly bright. My father raised me alongside my brothers on a ranch in Texas. He didn't believe in coddling any of us. Her amusement faded. Thomas worries, though. Says I take too many risks. Your husband sounds like a sensible man. He is, she agreed, though something in her tone suggested complexity. Thomas built the Flying W from nothing. Every decision he makes is calculated, considered, nothing left to chance. She paused. Sometimes I think he forgets that life itself is a risk, that we can't control everything. Thunder carried them over a small ridge, revealing a broader vista beyond. In the distance, patches of green stood out against the desert landscape, cultivated land. The settlement of Copper Springs is just beyond that line of trees, Sarah explained, pointing. Our ranch lies about 3 miles east from there. As they descended toward more populated terrain, Jack felt the familiar tension return to his shoulders. Towns, settlements, ranches. These were places where his presence was often unwelcome. Where mothers pulled their children closer and men watched him with narrowed eyes. Your husband's men, Jack said, breaking another long silence. Will they be searching for you? Yes, Sarah confirmed. Thomas is still in the North Pastures, but he left Hank Williams in charge. Hank would have sent riders out when I didn't return yesterday. Jack nodded, calculating. They'll be watching the main trails. Probably searched the river already. They're good men, Sarah said, defending them preemptively. But none with your tracking skills. Jack made a non-committal sound. They were approaching a small stream when thunder suddenly stopped, ears flicking forward in alert. Jack's hand moved instinctively to his rifle. What is it? Sarah whispered. Riders, Jack replied, his senses heightened. Coming fast from the east. Through the shimmering heat haze, several mounted figures appeared, moving with purpose across the landscape. Sarah straightened in the saddle. Flying W men, she confirmed, spotting their distinctive hatbands. That's Hank in the lead. Jack's posture didn't relax. Experience had taught him that even rescuers could become threats when a woman of Sarah's standing was found in the company of a man like him. Especially a man with Apache blood. The riders approached rapidly, dust billowing behind them like angry spirits. Jack remained motionless, one hand resting casually near his holster, while the other held Thunder's reins. He felt Sarah's body tense against his. Hank can be protective, she murmured. Let me speak first. Jack gave a slight nod, his face revealing nothing of his thoughts. He'd faced down hostile white men before. Sometimes words were enough, sometimes not. The lead rider spotted them and raised his arm, signaling the others. 6 men in total, all armed, their expressions shifting from determined to confused as they drew closer. Jack could read the moment they registered his presence, the narrowing of eyes, the subtle shift of hands toward weapons. "Mrs. Whitman!" the leader called out, spurring his horse ahead of the others. He was a weathered man in his 50s, with iron-grey hair and a thick moustache. His eyes, sharp beneath the brim of his hat, darted between Sarah and Jack with obvious concern. "Hank," Sarah acknowledged, her voice steady and authoritative despite her disheveled appearance. "I'm all right, thanks to Mr. Morrison here." Hank Williams pulled his horse to a stop several yards away, the other riders fanning out behind him in a semicircle. Their stance was unmistakably defensive. "We've been searching since yesterday evening, ma'am," Hank said, his gaze fixed suspiciously on Jack. "Your mare came back riderless. We feared the worst." "And with good reason," Sarah replied. "I was attacked by bandits near the Salt River crossing. They took everything, money, supplies, my horse." Her hand moved protectively over her belly. "I fell into the river during my escape." A murmur ran through the men. One of them, younger than the rest, with a face like sun-baked clay, spat on the ground. "Injuns, most likely," he muttered, just loud enough to be heard. Jack's expression didn't change, but Sarah stiffened against him. "No, Matthew," she said sharply. "White men, their leader had a scar through his right eyebrow. Mr. Morrison believes he may be James Corbin." The name sent another ripple of tension through the group. Corbin's reputation was evidently known to them. "And how exactly did you come to be in this man's company, ma'am?" Hank asked, his tone careful, but his meaning clear. Sarah's chin lifted slightly. "Mr. Morrison pulled me from the river at great risk to himself. He provided shelter, food, and his own coat when I was freezing. And now he's bringing me home." Her voice took on an edge of steel. "I owe him my life, Hank, and that of my unborn child." Hank absorbed this, his weathered face unreadable. His eyes met Jack's in a long, assessing stare. "You're the bounty hunter," he said finally. "The one they call Silent Wolf." Jack inclined his head slightly. "Jack Morrison," he corrected. "He's half Apache," Sarah added, a challenge in her voice. "Isn't a former army scout, and the finest tracker in the territory from what I've seen." The younger ranch hand who'd spoken before, Matthew, shifted in his saddle, clearly uncomfortable. "Mrs. Whitman, perhaps you should ride with one of us now. We can take you home." Before Sarah could respond, Hank raised a hand, silencing him. "The lady seems comfortable enough where she is, Matt." His gaze returned to Jack. "Mr. Morrison, the Flying W owes you a debt. Mrs. Whitman is precious to all of us." Jack nodded once, accepting the statement for the olive branch it was. "The river is dangerous this time of year," he said simply. "Anyone would have done the same." A ghost of a smile touched Hank's lips. "No, sir, not anyone." He turned his horse, gesturing to the others. "We'll escort you to the ranch." "It's not far now." The group rearranged itself, 2 riders taking the lead while Hank and the others fell in behind Jack and Sarah. The formation was ostensibly protective, but Jack wasn't fooled. They were watching him as much as the surrounding terrain. As they rode, Sarah leaned back slightly, her voice pitched for Jack's ears alone. "I'm sorry about Matthew. He's young and—" "No need," Jack interrupted quietly. "I've heard worse." She twisted in the saddle to look at him, her blue eyes searching his face. "That doesn't make it right." Jack met her gaze steadily. There was something in her expression, not pity, which he would have resented, but a genuine indignation on his behalf that was both unfamiliar and oddly touching. "Your husband," he said, changing the subject. "When will he return from the North Pastures?" "Tomorrow, most likely," Sarah replied. "He took a large crew to move the herd to summer grazing land. It's a 3-day journey each way." Jack nodded, processing this information. By tomorrow, he would be long gone, back on Corbin's trail. The Flying W and Sarah Whitman would become just another brief encounter in a life composed mostly of transient connections. The thought brought an unexpected pang of regret. They crested a gentle rise, and suddenly the Flying W spread before them, a sprawling ranch house of timber and stone, surrounded by outbuildings, corrals, and well-tended fields. In the distance, cattle grazed on green pasture, a testament to Thomas Whitman's success in taming this harsh land. "Home," Sarah said softly, and Jack felt her body relax completely for the first time since he'd pulled her from the river. For her, perhaps. But as the ranch hand's wary glances reminded him, men like Jack Morrison were never truly welcome in such places for long. The wilderness was his home, the only one that had ever accepted him without reservation. A woman appeared on the porch of the main house, shading her eyes against the sun. Upon spotting the approaching group, she hurried down the steps, her skirts billowing around her. "That's Martha," Sarah explained. "Our housekeeper. More like family, really." Jack nodded, noting the maternal concern on the older woman's face as she waited for them. Here, at least, was someone who loved Sarah Whitman for herself, not for her position as the ranch owner's wife. As they approached the house, Jack felt the familiar weight of decision settling on his shoulders. Deliver Sarah safely, collect whatever reward was offered, and leave before Thomas Whitman returned. That was the sensible course, the one that would let him resume his hunt for Corbin without complication. Simple, straightforward. So why did it suddenly feel like a retreat? The main house of the Flying W loomed larger as they approached, an impressive 2-story structure with a wide veranda and tall windows that caught the morning light. To Jack, accustomed to sleeping beneath the stars or in crude lean-tos, it seemed almost palatial, a testament to wealth and permanence in a land where most men still lived in tents or one-room cabins. As they reached the front yard, Hank dismounted swiftly, moving to help Sarah down. Jack slid from the saddle first, then offered his hands to assist her himself. There was a moment of silent tension before Hank stepped back, acknowledging Jack's right to complete what he had started. Sarah's fingers gripped Jack's forearms as he lifted her gently to the ground. "Thank you," she murmured, the words carrying more weight than the simple courtesy suggested. Martha bustled forward, her round face creased with worry. She was a sturdy woman in her 50s, with graying hair pulled back in a severe bun and sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Merciful heavens, Mrs. Whitman," she exclaimed, taking in Sarah's disheveled appearance and the obvious signs of her ordeal. "When your horse came back empty-saddled, I feared the worst. Are you hurt?" "The baby. We're both fine, Martha," Sarah assured her, submitting to the older woman's fussing with the patience of long familiarity. "Thanks to Mr. Morrison." Martha's keen gaze shifted to Jack, taking in his buckskins, his weather-beaten face, the quiet watchfulness in his eyes. Where the ranch hands had shown wariness tinged with hostility, Martha's assessment was more measured. "Then we're in your debt, Mr. Morrison," she said, inclining her head slightly. "Not many would risk themselves for a stranger in these parts." Jack acknowledged her words with a slight nod, uncomfortable with gratitude now, as he had been with Sarah's. "Just happened to be there," he said. "Providence, I'd call it," Martha replied firmly. Then, turning back to Sarah, "You need a hot bath, a proper meal, and rest, in that order. Dr. Ellis should look at you too. I've already sent for him. Sarah looked like she might protest, but something in Martha's expression stopped her. Instead, she turned to Jack. You'll stay for a meal, at least. It's the very minimum we can offer. Before Jack could respond, Hank stepped forward. Mr. Morrison might be interested in more than just a meal, ma'am. There's the matter of the reward. Sarah's expression clouded with confusion. Reward. $500 for information leading to James Corbin's capture, Hank explained. If Mr. Morrison can help us locate the men who attacked you, especially if one of them is indeed Corbin, then that reward is rightfully his. Jack's face remained impassive, but his mind worked quickly. The bounty on Corbin was indeed substantial, but tracking the outlaw would be easier alone. A posse of ranch hands, however well-intentioned, would only slow him down. The Flying W would match that amount, Sarah said suddenly, her eyes meeting Jack's. Another $500, as our personal thanks for my rescue. $1,000. It was more money than most men in the territory saw in years, enough to buy supplies, perhaps a small cabin somewhere remote. Maybe even set aside something for his infrequent trips to civilization. Mr. Morrison can discuss the details with Thomas when he returns, Sarah continued, her tone making it clear the matter was settled. In the meantime, he'll be our guest. Martha nodded briskly. I'll prepare the room in the east wing. She gave Jack another appraising look. And perhaps draw some water for you as well, sir. After your river adventure, the prospect of a proper bath, his first in months, was tempting, but Jack felt the familiar urge to retreat, to return to the wilderness where he understood the rules and dangers. I should see to my horse, he said, a deflection rather than a refusal. Of course, Sarah agreed. Hank, please show Mr. Morrison to the stables. Make sure Thunder receives the best care. Yes, ma'am, Hank replied, though his expression suggested he'd rather keep Jack under his personal supervision. As Sarah allowed Martha to guide her toward the house, she glanced back at Jack. We dine at 6, Mr. Morrison. I hope you'll join us. It wasn't quite a command, but neither was it a mere invitation. Jack found himself nodding in agreement before he'd fully decided to stay. The stables were impressive, clean, well-organized, with spacious stalls and quality feed. Jack tended to Thunder himself, brushing the stallion down with methodical care while Hank leaned against a post, watching. Mrs. Whitman seems to think highly of you, the foreman said finally, breaking the silence. Jack continued brushing, his strokes even and unhurried. She's grateful, that's all. Hank studied him through narrowed eyes. Maybe. Maybe not. He straightened, adjusting his hat. Word of advice, Morrison, don't mistake gratitude for something else. Thomas Whitman isn't a man to cross. Jack paused, meeting the foreman's gaze directly. I'm not looking to cross anyone. Just did what needed doing. Good, Hank said with a curt nod. Keep it that way. He turned to leave, then hesitated. For what it's worth, I believe your story about the river. You've got a reputation as a man who keeps to himself, does his job, not as a liar. Coming from Hank, it was high praise indeed. Jack acknowledged it with a slight incline of his head. Left alone, Jack finished caring for Thunder, then explored the stable yard, noting entry points, defensive positions, lines of sight, old habits from his scouting days. The Flying W was well designed, both for comfort and security. Thomas Whitman clearly left little to chance. A young stable hand eventually appeared to show Jack to his quarters, a spacious room in the east wing of the main house, as Martha had promised. It contained a large bed with clean linens, a washstand with steaming water, soap, and a razor, and a wardrobe that, when opened, revealed men's clothing approximately his size. Mrs. Whitman said you might need fresh clothes, sir, the boy explained, seeing Jack's questioning look. These belong to Mr. Whitman's brother when he visited last summer. Jack nodded, dismissing the boy with a quiet word of thanks. Alone again, he approached the washstand warily, as if it might contain a trap. The face that looked back at him from the small mirror was a stranger's, weathered, unshaven, with lines etched deep around the eyes and mouth. When had he last looked at his own reflection? Months, perhaps. The hot water was a luxury he'd almost forgotten. He washed thoroughly, shaved, and reluctantly donned the borrowed clothes, a white shirt, dark trousers, and a vest that felt constrictive after his usual buckskins. The outfit belonged to a different world, a different man. Clean and uncomfortably civilized, Jack moved to the window, gazing out at the ranch spread below. Workers moved purposefully between buildings. Cattle grazed in distant pastures. Smoke rose from the cookhouse chimney. The ordered industry of it all was foreign to him, yet he could appreciate the vision and determination it represented. A flash of movement caught his eye. Sarah, freshly bathed and dressed in a simple blue gown, walking slowly in the garden with Martha hovering nearby. Even from this distance, Jack could see the grace in her movements, the quiet dignity that had impressed him from their first meeting. A soft knock at the door pulled his attention away. It was Hank, his expression grim. "Riders coming," the foreman said without preamble. "One of our men just returned from Copper Springs. Says Corbin and his gang were spotted there yesterday, asking questions about the Flying W." Jack's body tensed, instincts sharpening. "What kind of questions?" "About shipments, money, and—" Hank hesitated, his gaze flicking toward the window where Sarah could be seen. "About Mrs. Whitman's habits, her regular trips to town." Understanding dawned cold and clear. "And they weren't random bandits," Jack said quietly. "They were watching her, waiting." Hank nodded, his weathered face grave. "Seems like. Question is, why?" Jack abandoned the borrowed finery in favor of his own dried buckskins, checking his weapons with practiced efficiency. His instincts, honed through years of survival in hostile territory, were now fully alert, scanning for threats both seen and unseen. "Tell me about Whitman," he said to Hank as they strode across the yard, their pace matching naturally. "Any enemies? Rivals?" Hank's expression was guarded. "Thomas is a successful man. Success breeds resentment." "I need specifics," Jack pressed, his voice low but insistent. "Corbin doesn't target women for sport. He's a thief, not a monster. If he was watching Mrs. Whitman, he wanted something." The foreman hesitated, then sighed. There's been tension with the Carter outfit to the south, water rights, and Thomas outbid Harrison Blake for the railroad contract last month, supply beef to the workers laying track through the territory." Jack absorbed this, his mind working. "Big contract, $30,000, Hank confirmed. First payment arrived 3 days ago. Thomas deposited most in the bank in Riverton before heading north, but kept some here for operating expenses. A substantial sum. Possibly motive enough for Corbin, but the timing felt too convenient." Jack's eyes narrowed as he surveyed the ranch, noting the number of hands visible, mentally calculating defensive positions. "How many men do you have right now?" 15, with another 20 due back with Thomas tomorrow." Hank's weathered face betrayed a flicker of concern. "You think they'll hit us here?" Jack considered this. "Maybe. Depends what they're really after." He turned to Hank. "I need to speak with Mrs. Whitman, alone." The foreman's posture stiffened slightly, protective instincts visible in the set of his shoulders. "She's resting." "Doctor's orders?" This can't wait, Jack insisted, his tone brooking no argument. If Corbin targeted her specifically, she might know why, even if she doesn't realize it. Reluctantly, Hank led him to a small sitting room off the main parlor, where Sarah reclined on a settee, a book open in her lap. She looked up as they entered, her expression brightening when she saw Jack. "Mr. Morrison, I see you've reverted to your own attire. More practical," Jack replied simply. He glanced at Hank, who hesitated before withdrawing, closing the door, but not, Jack suspected, going far. Sarah marked her place in the book and set it aside. "You look troubled." Jack took a seat across from her, leaning forward with his forearms resting on his knees. "The men who attacked you. They were waiting for you specifically." Her eyes widened slightly, but she showed remarkable composure. "How do you know?" "They were asking about you in Copper Springs, your habits, your schedule." Jack studied her face carefully. "This wasn't chance, Mrs. Whitman. They wanted you. I need to know why." Sarah's hand moved unconsciously to her belly, protective. "I don't understand." "I'm just a rancher's wife. Your husband's a wealthy man," Jack said. $30,000 is reason enough for men like Corbin." "The railroad contract," Sarah murmured, understanding dawning. "But Thomas deposited that money. There's nothing of value here except—" She stopped abruptly. Jack leaned closer. "Except—" Sarah hesitated, then sighed. "There's a safe in Thomas's study. He keeps documents there, some cash for emergencies. But only Thomas and I know the combination." And there it was. Jack sat back, the pieces clicking into place. "That's why they took you, not for ransom, for information." Sarah's face paled as the implications sank in. "They would have forced me to tell them." Jack didn't contradict her. They both knew what men like Corbin were capable of. "The river saved you from worse than drowning," he said quietly. A shudder passed through her, but when she met his eyes again, her gaze was steady. "What do we do now?" "First, we prepare," Jack said, impressed by her fortitude. "How many men attacked you?" "3 that I saw," Sarah replied, her brow furrowing in concentration. "But there could have been more nearby." "Corbin usually works with at least 5, Jack confirmed. "Maybe more for something this planned." She nodded, processing this. "Hank can organize the men. We have rifles, ammunition." "Good," Jack said. "But what we really need is to remove the temptation. Is there somewhere safer for you to go until your husband returns?" Sarah's chin lifted, a flash of that same determination he'd glimpsed by the river. "This is my home, Mr. Morrison. I won't be driven from it by thieves and murderers." Jack had expected nothing less. "Then we fortify. And we wait." The next hours passed in organized activity. Jack worked with Hank to position men around the property, establish patrol schedules, and prepare defensive positions. The ranch hands, initially wary of taking orders from an outsider, especially one with Apache blood, gradually came to respect Jack's tactical knowledge and calm authority. As twilight approached, Jack found himself on the veranda, watching the landscape fade into purple shadow. The ranch was as secure as they could make it with limited time and manpower. Now came the waiting, always the hardest part. "You didn't have to stay," Sarah said softly. Appearing beside him, she had changed into a simpler dress, her hair loosely braided over one shoulder. Jack glanced at her. "Yes, I did." She studied him in the fading light. "Because of the bounty." "Because they're still out there," he replied. "And because I pulled you from that river for a reason, seems wrong to leave the job half-finished." Sarah smiled slightly. "Is that what I am? A job?" Jack turned to face her fully. "No, Mum, you're not a job." He paused, searching for words to express something he didn't fully understand himself. "You're a person worth protecting." In the silence that followed, something shifted between them, not inappropriate or improper, but a recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits despite their vastly different lives. The moment was broken by the sound of approaching hoofbeats, a single rider, coming fast. Jack's hand moved to his revolver, his body shifting subtly to place himself between Sarah and the approaching rider. Hank emerged from the shadows of the yard, rifle raised, while two ranch hands took positions at the corners of the house. "Inside," Jack said quietly to Sarah. She hesitated, then shook her head. "This is my ranch." Jack recognized the steel in her voice and didn't waste time arguing. Instead, he moved to the edge of the veranda, using one of the support posts as partial cover. The rider was visible now, a solitary figure bent low over his horse's neck, pushing the animal hard. "It's Billy!" Hank called out suddenly, lowering his rifle. "One of our men!" The rider, little more than a boy, really, pulled his lathered horse to a sliding stop in the yard, dust billowing around them. He all but fell from the saddle, his face streaked with sweat and what looked like blood. "Mrs. Whitman!" he gasped, staggering forward. "Thank God you're safe." Sarah hurried down the steps, ignoring Jack's warning look. "Billy, what happened to you?" The young cowboy's face was ashen beneath his tan. "Ambushed, on the North Road. I was riding back from town with supplies when they hit us." "Us?" Hank demanded, gripping the boy's shoulder. "Me and Parker," Billy said, his voice breaking. "They shot Parker straight off, didn't even give him a chance." He swallowed hard. I got away, but they're coming. 6 men, maybe more, led by a tall fella with a scar through his eyebrow." Sarah's eyes found Jack's in the gathering darkness. "Corbin," Jack nodded grimly. "How far behind you?" he asked Billy. 3, 4 miles maybe. I cut cross-country, but they'll figure the direction." Jack's mind worked rapidly, calculating time, distance, options. "How many horses in the corral right now?" Hank understood immediately. Not enough to evacuate everyone. 10, maybe 12 saddled and ready. "That's all we need," Jack decided. "Mrs. Whitman and half your men. The rest of us stay. Make it look like the ranch is fully defended." Sarah stepped forward, shaking her head emphatically. "I already told you, I'm not leaving." "With respect, Ma'am," Jack said, his voice low and urgent. "What Corbin wants is in that safe. If you're not here to open it, they have less reason to attack. And more reason to burn the place to the ground out of spite," she countered. "No, Mr. Morrison, I stay." The determination in her eyes told Jack that further argument would be wasted breath. He nodded once, recalculating. "Then we make our stand here." The next half hour was a whirlwind of activity. Women and children, the cook's family, a couple of ranch hands' wives, were hustled to the storm cellar beneath the main house. Rifles and ammunition were distributed, positions assigned. Jack moved through it all with calm efficiency, his military training evident in every instruction. "Windows on the ground floor, blocked and barricaded," he ordered. "The second floor gives us the advantage of height. 4 men up there, covering all approaches." Hank matched his energy, translating Jack's broader strategy into specific assignments for men he knew well. The initial wariness the ranch hands had shown toward Jack had evaporated in the face of common danger. Now they followed his directions without question, recognizing the authority of experience. In Thomas Whitman's study, Jack examined the safe, a substantial iron box bolted to the floor in a corner, partially hidden behind a desk. "That's what they're coming for," he said to Sarah, who stood in the doorway, a rifle in her hands. She had changed into a split riding skirt that allowed more freedom of movement, her hair now tightly braided down her back. "Should we empty it?" she asked. "Hide the contents." Jack considered this. "No. Better to keep it where it is, Controlled access point. He surveyed the room, noting the heavy oak desk, the bookshelves, the single window with its clear view of the approach to the house. This room becomes our fallback position if they breach the house. Sarah nodded, understanding. I've sent Martha to the cellar with the others. She didn't want to go. Brave woman, Jack commented, moving to check the window's latch.
She practically raised Thomas after his mother died, Sarah said, a hint of fondness warming her voice despite the tension. Says she's too old to start cowering now. Jack allowed himself a brief smile, then grew serious again. You should join her in your condition. My condition doesn't change who I am, Sarah interrupted firmly. I can shoot as well as any man on this ranch.
My father made sure of that. Jack studied her, the resolute set of her jaw, the capable way she held the rifle, the unwavering gaze that met his without flinching. He'd known women like her before, frontier women with backbones of iron and hearts just as strong. Women who survived in this harsh land, not by being protected, but by being prepared. Stay on the second floor then, he conceded. Oh, good visibility, more protection, he hesitated, then added, and Sarah, if it comes to it, if they breach the house, the safe combination isn't worth your life, or your child's. The use of her first name wasn't lost on her. Her expression softened momentarily. I understand. Outside, the ranch had fallen eerily quiet. Lanterns were extinguished, leaving only the silver illumination of a three-quarter moon to outline buildings and cast long shadows across the yard. Men waited at their posts, speaking in whispers if at all. The night seemed to hold its breath. Jack took position on the second-floor landing, where a window offered a commanding view of the main approach. Hank stationed himself at the opposite end of the house, covering the rear. The minutes stretched, marked only by the soft ticking of a grandfather clock in the hallway below. Do you think they'll come tonight? Sarah asked softly, joining Jack at the window. She moved differently now, he noticed, more carefully, one hand often supporting her lower back. Yes, he replied simply. The darkness works in their favor. And Corbin isn't a man to waste opportunity. Sarah leaned against the wall beside the window, her face pale in the moonlight. I've never been in a siege before. It's not a siege yet, Jack said, his eyes constantly scanning the darkness beyond the glass. Right now, it's just waiting. I'm not very good at waiting, she admitted with a small, tight smile. Jack glanced at her. Tell me about Texas, he said, partly to distract her, partly because he found himself genuinely curious about the life that had shaped this remarkable woman. Sarah looked surprised, but grateful for the conversation. My father's ranch was nothing like this. Smaller, rougher. We worked alongside the hands, all of us, 3 brothers and me. Her eyes took on a distant quality. Papa didn't believe girls should be raised any differently than boys, especially on the frontier. Life doesn't make allowances for gender, he used to say. Wise man, Jack commented. He was, Sarah agreed. Though my husband doesn't always share that view, Thomas believes in traditional roles. There was something in her tone, not quite resentment, but perhaps resignation, that made Jack look at her more closely. And you, Sarah met his gaze steadily. I believe we are what we make of ourselves, Mr. Morrison, man or woman, white or Apache. The courage in our hearts matters more than the circumstances of our birth. Before Jack could respond, a low whistle sounded from below, the signal they'd arranged. His body tensed, all senses sharpening to knife-edge acuity. They're here, he said quietly, raising his rifle. In the silver-blue moonlight, shadowy figures detached themselves from the darkness at the edge of the property. 6 men, just as Billy had reported, moving with the practiced stealth of predators approaching a kill. The waiting was over. The first shot came without warning, a muzzle flash from the darkness, followed by the sound of breaking glass downstairs. Jack instinctively pulled Sarah away from the window, pressing her against the wall beside him. "If they're testing our positions," he murmured, his body tense but his voice steady, "seeing if we'll return fire and reveal ourselves." Hank had clearly instructed his men well. The ranch remained silent, giving away nothing. Jack peered carefully around the window frame, counting shadows, noting positions. The moon slid behind a cloud, plunging the yard into deeper darkness. A voice called out from near the barn, confident and mocking. "Oh, we know you're in there, Mrs. Whitman. All we want is what's in that safe. Give us that, and nobody needs to get hurt." Jack recognized the voice from wanted posters and witness descriptions. James Corbin himself, not delegating this task to underlings. That was telling. Whatever was in the safe, Corbin wanted it badly enough to lead the raid personally. Sarah's fingers tightened on her rifle. "That's him," she whispered. "Do the one with the scar?" Jack nodded, his mind racing through scenarios, calculating odds. 15 defenders against 6 attackers, good numbers in a normal situation. But these weren't normal circumstances. Corbin's men were experienced killers, while most of the ranch hands were cowboys, not gunfighters. "Your husband doesn't need to know about our arrangement," Corbin continued, his voice carrying easily in the night air. "I just opened the safe. We take what we came for, and we'll be gone before he returns. No one the wiser." Jack glanced at Sarah, whose face had hardened at the implication. "He's trying to create doubt," he said quietly. "Drive a wedge between you and your men." "My men know better," she replied, though a hint of worry creased her brow. Below, they heard the sound of shuffling feet as several ranch hands moved to new positions. Jack had positioned men in the bunkhouse and cookhouse as well as the main house, creating a crossfire zone in the central yard. If Corbin's men advanced, they'd be exposed from multiple angles. "Last chance, Mrs. Whitman," Corbin called out, a new edge to his voice. "Or we start burning buildings." "How much of your husband's precious ranch are you willing to sacrifice?" Jack touched Sarah's arm, nodding toward a position further along the hallway, a different window with a clearer angle on the barn area. "If he's where I think he is, you could take a shot from there," he said softly. "Might end this before it begins." Sarah hesitated, then shook her head. "I won't fire first. These men work for my husband. I won't put them at risk unless I have no choice." Jack respected her decision, though part of him, the cold, calculating part that had kept him alive all these years, knew that waiting yielded the advantage to Corbin. The outlaw's patience ran out moments later. A flaming arrow arced through the darkness, landing on the roof of the bunkhouse. Almost simultaneously, gunfire erupted from multiple positions, Corbin's men shooting at windows, doors, anywhere they might hit defenders. "Now!" Jack shouted, and the ranch hands returned fire in a coordinated volley that sent at least one attacker diving for cover with a pained yelp. What followed was a chaotic exchange of gunfire, muzzle flashes illuminating the night in staccato bursts. Jack moved efficiently from window to window, firing at shadowy figures when they presented themselves, constantly calculating ammunition, angles, vulnerabilities. Sarah proved her earlier claim about her shooting abilities, calmly taking aimed shots when opportunities arose. Her focus was remarkable, her hands steady despite her condition and the danger surrounding them. "Aye, they're moving toward the house," she warned, spotting what Jack had already noticed. 3 figures using the water trough as cover, advancing in short rushes while their companions provided covering fire. "Hank!" Jack called out. "3 coming in from the south side." The foreman's acknowledgement was drowned out by a sudden explosion that shook the house. Corbin's men had dynamited the front door. Splinters of wood flew like shrapnel, and the sound of boots on the main floor told Jack they'd breached the building. "The study," he said to Sarah, gripping her arm. "Now." They moved swiftly down the hallway toward the back stairs, Jack leading the way with his Colt drawn. From below came shouts, the crash of furniture being overturned, a scream that might have been one of the younger ranch hands. "Upstairs!" a voice bellowed, not Corbin's, but one of his men. "Find the woman!" Jack and Sarah reached the study just as heavy footsteps sounded on the main staircase. He ushered her inside, barricading the door with the heavy oak desk. "How many rounds do you have left?" he asked, checking his own ammunition. 3 bullets in the revolver, 7 more in his belt. "5, Sarah replied, breaking open her rifle to verify. Jack positioned himself beside the door, listening to the approaching footsteps. "When they come through, aim low," he instructed. "Most men expect shots at chest height." Sarah nodded, taking position behind the desk, using it as a shield for her unborn child. Her face was pale but composed, her breathing steady. The first impact against the door made the hinges creak. The second splintered the wood around the lock. The third, a new sound cut through the chaos, the thunderous report of a rifle from outside, followed by shouts of alarm from Corbin's men, then another shot, and another, in rapid succession. "What's happening?" Sarah whispered, her eyes wide. Before Jack could respond, a voice boomed from the yard below, amplified by fury and carrying the unmistakable authority of ownership. "Corbin, this is Thomas Whitman. You're on my land, threatening my wife." "Show yourself or my men will burn you out." Sarah's breath caught. "Thomas, but he's not due back until tomorrow." Jack moved to the window, peering out cautiously. In the yard below, at least 20 mounted men had surrounded the house, rifles aimed inward. At their center, a tall figure on a black stallion held a shotgun with the practiced ease of a man accustomed to command. Thomas Whitman had returned early, and he'd brought an army with him. Inside the study, the door splintered open, and Jack spun to face the threat, finding himself staring directly into the cold eyes and scarred face of James Corbin, whose revolver was aimed not at Jack, but at Sarah's heart. Time slowed to a crawl. Jack saw every detail with preternatural clarity, the murderous gleam in Corbin's eyes, the hammer of the revolver cocked back, Sarah's defiant stance despite the fear etched on her face. Outside, Thomas Whitman's men were closing in, but they were seconds too late for what was happening inside this room. Corbin's lips twisted into a cruel smile. "Looks like your husband came home early, Mrs. Whitman. Shame he won't find much left of you." Jack moved without conscious thought, his body responding to instincts deeper than reason. He lunged forward, a snarl tearing from his throat, not the calculated action of a bounty hunter, but the desperate leap of a man unwilling to watch another woman die before his eyes. The study exploded with the thunder of gunfire. Jack felt a searing pain across his ribs as Corbin's bullet found him instead of Sarah. His momentum carried him forward, crashing into the outlaw with bone-jarring force. They fell together, Jack's larger frame driving Corbin to the floor. Corbin fought like a cornered wolf, all teeth and fury. His knee drove into Jack's wounded side, sending waves of agony through his body. The outlaw's revolver, knocked aside in the initial collision, lay just beyond reach. Both men scrambled for it, fingers stretching, muscles straining. Sarah's rifle cracked, the bullet splintering the floorboards inches from the gun, sending it skittering beneath the desk. Corbin cursed, twisting to pull a knife from his boot. The blade flashed in the dim light as he slashed at Jack's face. Jack caught Corbin's wrist, muscles bunching as he held the knife at bay. Blood, his own, made his grip slippery. For endless seconds, they remained locked together, straining against each other's strength, the knife trembling between them. "Mrs. Whitman," Jack managed through gritted teeth. "The door." Sarah moved quickly despite her awkward gait, pulling the shattered door wider open. "Thomas!" she called out, her voice carrying clearly through the chaos. "In the study!" Boots thundered up the stairs, but Jack knew they wouldn't arrive in time. Corbin was strong, desperate, and the knife was inching closer to Jack's throat. With a last surge of strength, Jack twisted his body, using leverage rather than raw power. Corbin's arm bent at an unnatural angle, and the outlaw screamed as bones snapped. The knife clattered to the floor. Jack rolled away, coming up on one knee, his hand finding his own revolver still holstered at his side. Corbin, cradling his broken arm, lunged for the fallen knife with his good hand. "Don't!" Jack said, his voice deadly quiet, the Colt aimed between Corbin's eyes. The outlaw froze, fury and calculation warring in his gaze. "You won't shoot an unarmed man," he spat, though uncertainty tinged his words. "He won't," came a new voice from the doorway. "Idit, but I will." Thomas Whitman stood there, shotgun leveled at Corbin's chest, his face a mask of cold rage. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with features that might have been handsome if not hardened by sun and responsibility. His eyes, the same blue as Sarah's, held no mercy. "Thomas," Sarah breathed, relief washing over her face. Whitman spared her the briefest glance, his expression softening momentarily before returning to steel. "Are you hurt?" "No," she replied, "thanks to Mr. Morrison." Hank appeared behind Thomas, along with two ranch hands. At Thomas's nod, they moved forward to secure Corbin, none too gently dragging the outlaw to his feet. "The others?" Jack asked, slowly standing, one hand pressed to his bleeding side. "Two dead, 3 captured," Thomas reported grimly. "One of my men wounded, not seriously." His gaze shifted to Jack's blood-stained shirt. "You need attention," Jack shook his head. "I've had worse." It wasn't bravado. He had the room filled with more men, ranch hands confirming the property was secure, checking on their mistress, awaiting further orders from their boss. Through it all, Thomas Whitman's eyes kept returning to Jack, assessing, questioning. Later, after Corbin and his surviving men had been locked in the tack room under armed guard, after Jack's wound had been cleaned and bandaged by Martha despite his protests, after Sarah had been examined by the hastily summoned doctor and pronounced remarkably well considering her ordeal, Thomas Whitman found Jack on the veranda, watching the first pale light of dawn touch the eastern hills. "My wife told me what you did," Thomas said without preamble, leaning against the railing beside Jack. "Pulling her from the river, bringing her home safely, defending our ranch." He paused, seeming to choose his next words carefully. "I'm not a man accustomed to owing debts, Mr. Morrison, but I owe you one I can never fully repay." Jack kept his eyes on the horizon. No debt. Just did what needed doing. Perhaps. Thomas studied his profile, but not many would have, especially... He trailed off, apparently thinking better of what he'd been about to say. "Especially someone like me." Jack finished for him, a hint of challenge in his voice. Thomas had the grace to look discomfited. "I meant a bounty hunter, a man with no stake in our affairs." He sighed, rubbing a hand across his face. "I've heard of you, Morrison, Silent Wolf. They say you're the best tracker in the territory, that you can find anyone, anywhere." "Most times," Jack acknowledged. "The Flying W could use a man with your skills," Thomas said, the words coming out in a rush, as if he'd been considering them carefully. We lose cattle to rustlers, have trouble with wild predators, occasionally need to find strays in rough country. He turned to face Jack directly. "I'm offering you a job, a permanent position, good wages, a cabin of your own on the property." Jack's surprise must have shown on his face because Thomas continued more confidently. "You'd answer to me, of course, but I run a fair operation. Ask any of my men." "Why?" Jack asked simply. Thomas hesitated. "Because you saved my wife, my child, my home." His voice roughened with emotion he seemed unaccustomed to showing. "And because Sarah trusts you. She's a good judge of character, better than I am, truth be told." The door opened behind them, and Sarah stepped out onto the veranda, wrapped in a shawl against the morning chill. Her face was tired but serene, one hand resting on her belly as she approached the two men. "Has my husband made his offer yet?" she asked, coming to stand beside Thomas, who automatically put an arm around her shoulders. Jack raised an eyebrow. "Your idea?" "Ours," Sarah corrected, leaning slightly into her husband's embrace. "The Flying W needs a man of your particular talents, Mr. Morrison, and if I may be so bold, you need a place where those talents are valued." "Where you are valued." Jack looked away, uncomfortable with her insight. His gaze swept across the ranch, now peaceful in the growing light. Smoke rose from the cookhouse chimney. Horses nickered in the corral. Men moved about their morning chores with the reassuring rhythm of routine restored. "I'm not much for staying in one place," he said finally, "or working for others." "You wouldn't be working for me," Thomas said unexpectedly. "You'd be working with me. There's a difference." Jack studied the rancher's face, seeing in it a sincerity that couldn't be feigned. Then he looked at Sarah, whose eyes held a warmth and understanding that reached past his defenses to touch something long buried. "At least stay until after the baby comes," she urged softly. "I'd rest easier knowing you were nearby." That was unfair, and she knew it. Jack almost smiled at the tactical brilliance of her appeal. How could he refuse her anything after what they'd been through together? "Until the baby," he conceded. "After that, we'll see." Thomas extended his hand and Jack took it, sealing the agreement with a firm handshake. Something passed between the two men in that moment, a mutual recognition, perhaps, of what each had risked and what each valued. 3 months later, Jack stood on the same veranda, watching a summer thunderstorm roll across the plains toward the Flying W. The ranch had changed subtly in the time he'd been there. New fencing around the northern pastures, additional hands hired to manage the expanding herd, a fresh coat of paint on the main house. Small improvements that spoke of prosperity and permanence. Jack had changed too, though less visibly. His cabin, situated on a small rise overlooking the eastern range, had gradually accumulated possessions beyond his usual Spartan requirements. Books borrowed from Sarah's library, a comfortable chair crafted by one of the ranch hands, curtains that Martha had insisted on hanging to keep the dust out. His buckskins still hung ready for use, but more often now he wore the practical clothing of a working rancher. The sound of rapid hoofbeats drew his attention. A rider approached from the main house, pushing his horse to a gallop despite the coming storm. It was Matthew, the young hand who had once eyed Jack with such suspicion, now one of his most eager pupils in tracking and wilderness skills. "Mr. Morrison!" the boy called out, reining in his mount with a dramatic slide that showered Jack's boots with dust. "It's Mrs. Whitman." "The baby's coming." Jack's heart leaped into his throat. "Thomas, still in Riverton with the cattle shipment," Matthew replied, already turning his horse. "Mrs. Whitman's asking for you, sir." Jack didn't hesitate. He swung onto Thunder's back and urged the stallion toward the main house, outpacing Matthew easily. The storm clouds seemed to race them, wind whipping at their backs as if nature itself understood the urgency. Inside, he found Martha directing a flurry of activity, water being heated, linens prepared, furniture moved. The housekeeper looked relieved at the sight of him. "Thank heaven you're here," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "She's upstairs with Dr. Ellis, but she's asking for you." Jack hesitated at the foot of the stairs, suddenly uncertain. Childbirth was women's business, not a place for men, especially not men who weren't family. Martha read his hesitation correctly. "Go on," she urged, giving him a gentle push. "You pulled that child's mother from a raging river. I'd say that gives you certain rights." He climbed the stairs slowly, pausing outside Sarah's bedroom door. From within came the sound of labored breathing, punctuated by Dr. Ellis's calm instructions. Jack knocked softly. The doctor opened the door, looking harried but professional. "Ah, Morrison. Good. Perhaps you can help keep her calm. She's been asking for you and her husband both, and I can only provide one of you." Sarah lay on the bed, hair damp with perspiration, face flushed with effort. Her eyes brightened when she saw Jack. "You came," she said simply, reaching out a hand. Jack moved to her side, taking her outstretched fingers in his own. "Of course." Hours later, as lightning flashed across the sky and thunder shook the windows, a new sound joined the storm's symphony, the lusty cry of a newborn taking his first breath. Dr. Ellis beamed as he placed the tiny, red-faced infant in Sarah's arms. "A healthy son, Mrs. Whitman," he announced. "Strong lungs, good weight." Sarah gazed down at her child with awe, tears mingling with the sweat on her cheeks. Outside, rain began to fall in earnest, drumming against the roof in a soothing rhythm. "Jack," she said softly, using his first name without the formality that usually existed between them. "Meet John Thomas Whitman." Jack stared at the infant, then at Sarah, understanding dawning slowly. "John, after you," she confirmed, her smile tired but radiant. "John Algernon Morrison." "If that's all right." Something tightened in Jack's chest, an unfamiliar pressure that was not quite pain. He had no words, so he simply nodded, his calloused fingers reaching out to touch the baby's impossibly small hand. When Thomas Whitman arrived home the following day, soaked from riding through the remnants of the storm and wild-eyed with worry, he found his wife propped up in bed, their son nursing contentedly at her breast. Jack rose from the chair beside them, moving to leave the new family in privacy. Thomas stopped him with a hand on his shoulder. The two men regarded each other for a long moment. No words needed between them. Then Thomas drew Jack into a rough embrace, the kind shared between brothers. "Stay," Thomas said, his voice gruff with emotion, "not just until the baby comes." "It's already here." He gestured to the scene before them. Sarah, the child, the room warm with lamplight against the grey day outside. "Stay, because this is where you belong now. With us." Jack looked at Sarah, who watched them both with quiet joy, then at the infant in her arms, John Thomas Whitman, named for two men from vastly different worlds, now connected by something stronger than blood. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, Jack Morrison, once called Silent Wolf, once a man without home or hearth, felt the wandering spirit within him grow still. "Yes," he said simply, "I'll stay." Outside, the storm moved on, leaving behind a washed-clean world where old boundaries had been erased and new possibilities stretched to the horizon. Just as the Arizona Territory was being transformed by the meeting of different peoples and traditions, so too was the Flying W becoming something new. A place where a half Apache bounty hunter could find not just work, but family. Not through blood, but through choice, through courage, through the simple, profound act of reaching out a hand to someone in need and finding that in saving another, one might also save oneself.